He says the idea that it is a treaty, he writes, continuing on in his letter, is especially important. He says it's clear that it more closely resembles a treaty than a trade deal. Through fast track, Congress would be pre-clearing a political and economic union before a word of that arrangement has been made available to a single private citizen. But see, we are not stakeholders. We're not the ones who are creating this, and they say we don't have a stake. We're not allowed to see it, and of course, it tells you something, doesn't it, when our elected representatives are muzzled and gagged and controlled like this. It tells you who the real controllers are. That's why I say the G7 that everybody paid so much attention to, and now you see the media completely ignoring Bilderberg. Bilderberg is where the real power brokers go. Now, this is the thing that concerns him. It's not just the fact that the Congress, through this fast-track process, has essentially signed the Enabling Act of the 21st century. Remember, the Enabling Act of 1933 was when the Reichstag signed over all legislative authority to Der Führer, to Adolf Hitler. That's precisely what the Senate has done with this trade promotion authority, and they do not have the authority to do that. They have to follow the Constitution. I think we need to oppose this based on the fact that it is a treaty, and they cannot amend the constitutional requirements for passing a treaty by passing a resolution or passing a law. But there's something else about this that's even more troubling in the long run, and that is, even though they will not be able to amend this agreement, once it is passed, he points out there is a new transnational governance structure known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership Commission. This new governance commission, he says, has extremely broad powers. It will have the hallmarks of a nascent European Union with many similarities. This is the senator who has actually read the agreement. As I point out, there's only been a couple who have seen it. Rand Paul has seen it. We are getting the most detailed overview of the dangers of this from Senator Sessions that we've seen from anyone so far. He says this new transnational commission, chartered with a living agreement clause, would have the authority to amend the agreement after its adoption to add new members, to issue regulations impacting labor, immigration, environmental, and commercial policy. In other words, our Congress will not be allowed to amend these trade agreements, but once they are passed, this new transnational governance structure called the Trans-Pacific Partnership Commission will be able to change it at will, including other countries like China. We're told this has to be done as a block against China. China could be admitted the day after this is passed by Congress. And then he finally points out, in effect, to adopt fast track is to agree to remove the constitutional protections against the creation of global governance structures before these structures are even made public. Congress, he says, should not even consider fast-tracking the transfer of sovereign power to a transnational structure before the details of that structure are made fully available for public review. Precisely. This is a massive change in sovereignty. And this is being done by the people who already have the power. They are rapidly consolidating power and wealth into their hands. We see this article today from INFOWARS. A billionaire warns us that social unrest is going to escalate as robots will fuel mass unemployment. Billionaire Johann Rupert says we're in for a huge change in society. He's a billionaire who made his money with Cartier jewelry and Chloe fashion. He said tension between the rich and the poor is set to escalate as robots and artificial intelligence will fuel mass unemployment. And of course, we've talked about this many times. The estimates range anywhere from 50 to 90% unemployment within the next 10 years. He says we cannot have 0.1% of 0.1% taking all of the spoils. Now, he himself has $7.5 billion. He says, though, how is society going to cope with structural unemployment and the envy, hatred, and social welfare? We are destroying the middle classes at this stage, and it will affect us, the global elite. He goes on to say, how is society going to cope with structural unemployment and the envy, hatred, and social warfare? We are destroying the middle classes at this stage, and it will affect us, in other words, the billionaires. He says it's unfair. So that's what keeps me awake at night. Well, you know, there's some things that keep me awake at night, too. When I look at where this is headed, it looks very bad. Look at this article from the Wall Street Journal talking about apartments in Hong Kong. Look at the future of Agenda 21, where they talk about mosquito apartments. These are apartments that are even under the 200 square feet, the apartments that are being touted to us by this Agenda 21, UN Agenda 21. Here's a case in Hong Kong. Of course, this is the worst case scenario, a highly populated city with very little land, but that's precisely what they're going to create with Agenda 21, making most of the land off limits to people, crowding us into a high density population as we see in Hong Kong. So here we have an apartment with 180 square feet going for $500,000 US, $516,000. He says even by Hong Kong's cramped standards, apartments are getting tinier and tinier. They're calling them mosquito-sized. He says this is part, however, of a broader trend of rising values of residential real estate in major cities around the world. Now, listen to this one. This is in a development called Mont Vert, also in Hong Kong. These are apartments that are smaller than 180 square feet. He said there were a lot of YouTube videos that are out showing people using their arms spread out to measure the living area. The living area is so small you can reach it by sticking your arms out on either side. How is this going? Now, as we see some of the billionaires concerned about this and concerned about how this is going to break down, we have others, like the CEO of Uber, who are rushing headlong into a future where they own everything and where they don't need any people. The question for Uber, I think, when he says, you're going to get to the point where our taxis are going to be very cheap once we get the driver out of the car. Once we have self-driving taxis, then the dude in the car goes away. It gets so cheap that private ownership of vehicles goes away. And I would ask him, if this is happening everywhere, not just in the taxi business, who's going to be able to afford to even ride in his cars? Of course, Uber is going to have transportation that is Uber always. He's going to be the one who owns everything. Look at what he just did this last week. They went to Carnegie Mellon, a place that has a very long history of robotics, of self-driving cars, and they basically hired away the entire robotics research staff. 40 key robotics researchers out of Carnegie Mellon essentially shut down their department. And then to try to make nice, they gave them a grant of several million dollars. They're able to do this because they can raise massive amount of money on Wall Street. They just raised $5 billion. Then they go out and they buy the entire engineering department of Carnegie Mellon. Now, of course, we've seen massive automation and displacement in other industries, for example, in agriculture. Nevertheless, what is fundamentally different about this is not only the attitude of the corporate elite, like the CEO of Uber, but also the idea that it isn't just going to be the transportation workers who are losing their jobs, it's going to be everyone. And if we look at the impact of these trade treaties that are coming up before us, we see that it's going to affect not only jobs, but it's going to affect privacy, information, it's going to affect our medicine, our food, as well as setting up the corporations, the multinational corporations, to be on a level that is equivalent to our governments. With more details on how this looks with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, here's a report from John Bound.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership trade package is beginning to unravel, with more prominent voices slamming President Obama and the Republican leadership over the secretive deal that threatens to cost American jobs and hand big corporations new powers that would violate national sovereignty. House Majority Whip Representative Steve Scalise of Louisiana and Rules Committee Chairman Representative Pete Sessions of Texas refused to reveal to Breitbart whether they had read the TPP agreement, but still said they would support the Trade Promotion Authority and allow President Barack Obama to fast-track the TPP. Lawmakers claim that TPA is separate from TPP and that they will review the final TPP agreement before it is considered by Congress. However, as Matthew Boyle explains, this explanation doesn't wash. A vote for the TPA is a de facto green light for the TPP, since there is essentially no way to halt a trade deal once it has been fast-tracked. Boyle writes, since Fast Track was created in the Richard Nixon administration, not one trade deal that started on Fast Track has been thwarted. As such, a vote for TPA is a vote for TPP, since passing TPA will all but guarantee the successful passage of TPP. Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Lindsey Graham, and Representative John Boehner are also refusing to reveal if they have visited the secret room to read the controversial TPP document, although all three are set to vote for the TPA. Daniel Horowitz, senior editor of the Conservative Review, writes, It is unforgivable for the Republican majority to shirk its congressional duty and refuse to read the text of a bill that will give Obama unprecedented authority over our economy. Passing a bill in order to find out what's in it is what placed the Pelosi Congress in the ash heap of history. It's not an auspicious path for ambitious politicians. The Washington Post reports the push from the president included direct calls to lawmakers, interviews with television stations in key states, and plans to bring several Democrats aboard Air Force One with him. Meanwhile, despite claims that climate change mandates would not be a part of TPP, President Obama admitted during an NPR interview on Wednesday that this would indeed be the case. By passing such mandates via the TPP, Obama could sneak through draconian climate regulations under the radar, knowing that they would almost certainly be rejected by Congress on their own. This would satisfy calls by the likes of French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius, a Bilderberg member, to enforce the new rules via global treaties to cut Congress out of the equation. Obama will attend a summit in Paris in December to negotiate a climate agreement. Howard Richmond writes, Obama would not need to get Congress to approve the unfair climate change treaty terms that he negotiates. Instead, he could get the commission set up by the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement to add those terms to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. After that, the investor-state dispute settlement provisions set up by that agreement could enforce Obama's terms through the threat of multi-billion-dollar fines upon the U.S. government. Physicians are rallying as they become increasingly concerned about the passage of TPP. Prescription drug costs could waylay the affordability of biologics and thousands of prescription drugs by drastically altering intellectual property protections. Under the TPP, corporations could sue countries for restricting their products due to legislation brought to fruition by their own government policies. The investor-state dispute settlement portion of the TPP gives the upper hand. Legislative bodies would only act as advisory boards to the ruling corporocratic governments. Most recently, the World Trade Organization Tribunal ruled against the United States in a NAFTA suit brought by Canada and Mexico that claimed the U.S. country of origin labeling law, which requires foreign meat to be labeled as such, is an unfair and illegal trade practice. The WTO's May 18th ruling was the fourth time in 3 years that the global court had ruled against Cool, even though U.S. courts had ruled that Cool is legal. Faced with WTO penalties and threats of retaliation, the U.S. Congress is now considering repeal of Cool, and American consumers may soon lose the ability to discover if the meat at the grocery store or restaurant is U.S. raised or from Mexico, Brazil, or China. Critics of the TPP assert that the trade deal will cost American jobs and give huge corporations the power to change U.S. laws. John Bound for INFOWARS.com.
Now, there's two sides to medical tyranny. We're now looking at mandatory vaccines that remove our informed consent, but the other side of that is prohibiting us from taking alternative medicine that is safe and effective, medicine that we choose to take. That's the other way they can remove your consent. Of course, it's all being done for a medical cabal. The big pharmaceutical companies, the AMA, they're shutting it down. Now we see, of course, the tool that they use is the FDA, and they are coming after osteopaths. We see that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is taking a look at alternative medicine and quote-unquote natural cures. Without your comments, they could soon be unavailable. And as they point out, though homeopathy is one of the alternative medicines that carries a heavy controversial label, should the people not be able to pursue relatively harmless alternative medicine instead of choosing side effect riddled pharmaceutical drugs? In other words, you have the right to choose what you put in your body as medication. That's the essence of informed consent. And they can remove that by mandating certain things for you. They can also do that by prohibiting certain things from you. And of course, we see with the FDA the same kind of approach that we're going to be faced with these trans-Pacific, transatlantic partnerships. The kind of independent body that's, once it's created, is going to rewrite the laws without any input from the people. That's what we have right now in Washington. We have all these different organizations like the FDA, like the EPA. They write new rules and regulations prohibiting outdoor barbecues or fireplaces, whatever it is of the week that they want to prohibit. and we are essentially powerless to stop them. We have had the Congress abdicate its authority to them, and now they're about to do it on the international level. Now, one of the ways, of course, that we're very familiar with is marijuana. And of course, there's medical marijuana. We just had